this meeting of the Wakefield Conservation Commission to order at 12:11 p.m. on the 17th of October, 2025. Purpose of the meeting is discussion of continuing review and changes to the draft wetlands bylaw. Eleanor, taking attendance quickly. Eleanor?
Present.
And Jennifer?
Present.
And I, Paul Wendell, yes, am present. And I guess we can move into discussion. Ethan, did you circulated some thoughts
from what I circulated? I think we could lock in the resource areas and buffer zones that we want to be jurisdictional, and then go into the definitions that go with those. So that's
the definitions we would need to add
for each of those resources. Yeah.
Okay.
So we could just start with one resource, identify what we want from it, what we want to gain from it, as well as the buffers and setbacks that are associated with that.
Okay.
We could.
Can you guys hear Ethan?
Yes.
Then we could discuss if we want to change the definition at all or keep it the same as the Wetlands Protection Act.
Okay.
So Ethan, just to clarify, you were proposing working on the wet sections of the wetlands regulations, correct?
I think for today, just getting down the information, and then we could look into the outline.
I think sorry, I was a little unclear on the information you sent, because it read like you wanted to rewrite the entire bylaw. So because you didn't specify regulations, so I was confused. So I just want to make sure what kind of document we're working on.
I think for today, we're just backtracking and getting the conceptual information as far as the resources down, and then we can go into the actual document itself next time.
Paul, Jennifer, was that your expectation?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I can bring this back.
Yeah.
All right. I just want to make sure that Ethan can be heard. We need to confirm that we all agree on the resource areas we're trying to protect. First and foremost,
Yes. I thought we came away from the last meeting.
And what was your understanding?
So 25-foot setback for wetland resource areas. Sorry, it started a spreadsheet. Do we give me a second? Vernal pool habitat, the 100 feet with, from the outline of the vernal pool, that would be the habitat. Riverfront, no change, 200 feet. Isolated wetlands, if they're not vernal pool, I thought we agreed on 25 feet.
That's what we discussed.
Yeah.
That is what we discussed. Okay.
Is there anything else I'm missing?
So I'm clear. So vernal pool habitat, you're saying the 100 feet beyond the limit of it.
No.
And then we got to decide how we're defining that.
Sorry.
Vernal pool habitat includes the vernal pool and extends out 100 feet from the defined boundaries of the pool itself.
Right. And then is there a buffer on that?
No,
No.
that includes the buffer. That is the buffer
Okay.
that we're defining.
So that will be the buffer.
And intermittent streams was the last thing we discussed.
What was that?
Intermittent streams.
Intermittent streams, right. We agreed to include intermittent streams.
Yes,
and
we had a 25-foot buffer with a 10-foot setback, as I think is what we decided. Might be worth a revisit on that one.
Yeah, I think you want to revisit that, because typically if it's considered an intermittent stream, you just kind of use your BVW regulations. That's typically how that's done, right, Elaine?
Yeah, and you've got an automatic 100 feet.
Yeah, right. So you have your 100-foot already. The intermittent stream, if it's not perennial, then it's essentially a BVW. with,
it be-
with the bank, and you protect the bank as well.
Yeah, we have bank as a separate jurisdictional area too. So the
I,
bank-
I understand about it having a bank, although it is a lower bank, not an upper bank. But I don't understand the BVW. I don't understand how that's a BVW.
In practice, when you're filing, you would have wetland flags that are placed there rather than and you would have bank flags. You'd have both of those. But it would be, essentially, it meets the performance standards of a BVW if it's intermittent.
Because you can have BVW on a stream, even if it's intermittent, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, but generally, I mean, and Elaine, jump in here.
No, you've
In
got it
my
right.
experience, the way I've always done it, and all my filings have always come, so if it's, you would include the bank flags, and you would talk about any impacts to the bank itself, if you have any, and then replacement of bank if there's a need for that. And then the other flags would be so what would be the limit of the intermittent stream would be treated essentially as a BVW,
So it'd be regulated as a wetland.
as a wetland.
Yeah.
Just a typical wetland.
And what would be the delineation of that BVW on an intermittent stream?
Would
It
be
w-
the same as any other stream,
It would,
Or
it would,
any other brook or anything like that.
yeah, so it would be the bank. It would be the bank limit, right? Or the BVW flag, whichever is further out. And then we would put a buffer on that. That's how I've always done it.
So a good example would be that Two Clyde Court, for example, where that
Yeah.
wetland
That's
area.
a good example. Yeah, so those were considered wetland flags.
So
Um,
essentially, the wetland flags are set at the boundary of the stream. And then there's a buffer, whatever we set as the buffer to a BVW or regulated wetland under our jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider that you would just do your 25-foot buffer like you're doing for the BVW. I wouldn't recommend having a different setback, like a 10-foot and 25-foot. I wouldn't look to do that. That's too confusing for an applicant.
uh-huh.
Something like
Okay.
what's important is protected by the BVW buffers anyways.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and then what you end up with is the bank ends up being a resource area too, and you're quantifying that, so it's a linear foot impact, right?
yes.
And any replacement would have to be, 1-to-1 if you're modifying what the bank is.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you say that's what's typically done, do you mean in local bylaws or under Wetlands Protection Act?
Both. Both, that's how people file it, so your wetland scientist will go out there, right? And then they'll flag the bank, they'll flag the intermittent, the limit of the intermittent stream, which typically is gonna be either the bank or a wetland flag. And then you treat it as a wetland, so it meets the performance standards of a wetland. With the only added that the bank is a resource area too, and you quantify impacts for the bank.
Mhm. Yeah, just in the time I've been on the commission, I haven't seen examples of that, but that is, so intermittent streams do come before the commission as a BVW.
Right, yeah. So the performance standards would be the same as a BVW. So whatever you would be doing for BVW performance standards, that would apply to the intermittent stream unless you want to call it out separately and kind of make it redundant.
Bill, can they fill an intermittent stream
Yeah.
under the WPA? So the
5,000
performance state.
Yeah, I mean, typically you're not gonna get 5,000 square feet of fill. That'd be kind of difficult to do. Because you have to replace it too, don't forget. So, typically it's gonna be a much lower number. And, you do it for like a crossing, and then you'd have some type of, of culvert or stuff, so the flow go through. But you wouldn't meet mass stream crossing standards, I don't believe. That's the only question I have. No. For the intermittent streams, I don't think you meet the stream crossing standards, do you?
Oh, I feel like at the Voc they had to, even though some of those streams were intermittent.
They did that. They didn't, I don't believe they had to. They chose to.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought they, all right.
Okay, so then if we do treat them like a BVW under the bylaw, then the additional protection they would get is the 25-foot setback
Mhm.
from the really from the border of the wetland.
Yeah, border of wetland or bank, you're right, this is kind of both. Whichever one's the further limit, that's what you, where you put your.
Uh-huh.
So if we have the bank jurisdictional and the BVW, so we keep intermittent streams as jurisdictional to the bylaw, you think? Or just remove it altogether if it's redundant?
I mean, it's redundant, and it would be, in the wetland, in the WPA, it's essentially treated as a wetland, so you already have your performance standards, so if you're defining it separately.
I'm just thinking about when the last building in that North Avenue strip came before us. They tried to contend that the stream that flows toward Lake Quannapowick past them was an intermittent stream because nobody had data showing that it was a perennial stream.
Which one was this?
This was the most recent building on North Ave. That's the only one I was involved with at all.
Right,
And
yeah, I wouldn't agree with that.
I
I
don't either, but I would
Right.
agree, Bill,
Right.
that it
Yeah.
should be treated as a perennial stream. I drive over it virtually every day
Yeah,
on my
for
way
sure.
to the gym in Reading,
Yeah.
and it's always wet. It's even been wet in all the most recent dry periods, but
Yeah, for sure.
they argued that since no one had data proving otherwise, that they could treat it as intermittent and thereby get narrower setbacks. So I think we want to call out intermittent streams here to prevent that kind of gaming
Mhm.
under, if we're looking to protect them under the bylaw, I think we should have them called out as part of the bylaw then.
Well, so in that
okay.
case, you know, we should have had the 200-foot buffer and the alternatives analysis and all those things done. I thought that we had a comment on that initially. Or maybe they look to reduce it to the 100-foot because they're in the urbanized area. So that was
Those
what it
have to
was.
be specifically listed.
Yeah. So that
Those-
might have been a mess.
I think it was a mess.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what it was. So that's what it was. So we looked at this to be a perennial stream.
Mhm.
It didn't meet the watershed for the perennial stream. That's what the problem was. Thank you.
Oh, right, it was the
That's what it
area,
was.
the watershed area.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say, I'd be surprised if we missed that. So even though it's full, it doesn't have if it doesn't have the watershed, so the half square mile of watershed, then it's not, it's not. a
So
perennial
it's
stream.
classified as an intermittent stream just simply because it has a smaller watershed.
That's it.
So I think we want to call out intermittent streams then under this bylaw in order to protect streams like that,
Yeah.
which are
because-
essentially perennial, but just don't simply meet the watershed area
Bill,
standard.
can I ask you a question? Because
Yeah.
wouldn't that property have come up under the zoning bylaw stream setback standard? Like it, under Wakefield's existing stream setback bylaw, I think, it defines a stream or a bank as open water, essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
Can't be 25 feet, so there's a 25-foot buffer. In that,
Okay.
right?
I thought it was 50 feet for,
Is it 50? For
Under
the
the
structure?
zoning, it
It's
has to
50.
be 50.
yeah. So I'm curious why, did they get an exemption for that?
I don't know the history outside of what we had to deal with, Eleanor.
Okay,
That was a 40B.
There's,
That's what it was.
the latest one came in as a
Yeah,
40B,
because it's
yes.
a 40B, it didn't need to meet that, because it's a local
Okay.
bylaw, so they could waive it.
got it, okay.
Yes,
That's what-
exactly. So the only thing that came in under that, for that one was Wetland Protection Act,
Right,
because
State.
40B doesn't override state rules and
Got it.
regulations, but does override local.
okay, thanks for that clarification.
Sure.
takes a while to dredge out all of those memories.
Oh, we weren't
We're
here.
gonna team here because he's a better memory than me and he's writing the memo,
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
So, all right, so,
But
Anyway, I still think that it would be useful to maintain that intermittent stream component here, so.
And then
Yeah,
I think
I
100 buffer with a 25-foot setback.
yeah, I don't see, is there a reason to call it riverfront as opposed to stick with the BVW if that's more in line with the current practice?
so it's in line with the WPA. I mean, you're writing you're writing a bylaw and regulations, so you're writing, deciding what you want to use as resource areas that are more stringent than the WPA, right? So.
Yeah,
I
but the
think-
25-foot setback does make it more stringent.
Yeah,
Yes.
without a doubt. Yeah, without a
Mhm.
doubt. Well, I mean, there's also the performance standards in the WPA talking about, you know, for riverfront, you have to have alternatives analysis, Cs and all these other pieces to demonstrate that there's no other way to do it, and that you've maximized your setback from a river.
Mhm.
If you're looking to apply that towards an intermittent stream, then, you know, you'd have to call that out all differently. So you essentially create that new type of resource area.
I think it,
Am I being clear on that? I feel like I did, I wasn't.
I, for me, in listening to this discussion, the 25-foot no build or setback would be protective, more protective of an intermittent stream today, right? Because we're establishing
Yeah.
that buffer and the area will be treated as BVW. So that's much better than what we have today. At the same time, under our bylaw, the only scenario where that's going to get overridden would be a 40B situation.
Sure.
So I don't know that we need to go the extra mile to specifically put intermittent stream in the bylaw. That's the way I'm thinking of it, because
That's that would have been my recommendation, but obviously it's up to the commission on how you.
yeah, like,
I'm not sure I understand your logic, Eleanor.
okay.
Try making,
I'm gonna paraphrase what I understood Bill's message.
My
which
mess.
is- Let's see, this is not my wheelhouse, but if we have a 25-foot setback, right? That's a setback from the bank. That's a setback from essentially the intermittent stream, you know, which would be delineated like a wetland.
Mhm.
mhm.
So that is more protective than what's in place today, right? Because the Wetlands Protection Act allows you to do alterations in a buffer zone. Right? And we're trying to avoid.
Okay.
Yeah, all that's.
So you're just arguing, Eleanor, then that we shouldn't call out the intermittent stream. We should simply establish our 25-foot setback on all wetlands
Yes,
and not address intermittent streams as a separate category under that.
correct. Yes.
So
I'm seeing Bill's point.
Where we define what's being regulated. Is that the text of the,
No, but you can use like the bank, for example. to
right?
Have protection on the intermittent stream.
Okay,
Sorry, we didn't get that. Ethan, can you
You
speak?
could use the bank as
Yeah.
the reference for the protection on the intermittent stream instead of the stream itself. Because there's always going to be a bank on the stream.
Mhm.
I mean, I think because, so, you know, I wasn't aware that that was how intermittent streams were delineated. I don't know how widely known it is, especially to someone who's working with the Wetlands Protection Act for the first time. So I feel like it would be worthwhile even just to have a note, even if we don't necessarily put it forward as like a new resource area, but just a note for someone who's reading the bylaw to keep in mind that intermittent streams are regulated as bank and bordering vegetated wetland would be.
yeah, I still think it's worth calling them out.
I think it's clarity too.
Yeah,
So if you take the definition of stream in the Wetlands Protection Act, it says, you know, as long as you have a definite channel, and as long as it moves due to hydraulic gradient.
Yep.
It's classified as a stream, except if it is up gradient of a bordering vegetated wetland. So if you want to make it a little bit stricter, you may want to include that in your definition of stream. Because that will give you jurisdiction over streams that are up gradient of another resource area.
So if you're doing that, then you would define it as a resource area and set a set of performance standards for it. I would recommend you do that if you're gonna do that.
Yeah,
But the thing with the definitions, again, so we have to keep in mind on how these are gonna be filed, right? With as we're changing definitions, how that's gonna be filed relative to the WPA and the bylaw.
so if you use the definition of stream from the Wetlands Protection Act.
Yep.
Body of running water moves in a definite channel due to a hydraulic gradient and flows within, into, or out of another area subject to protection.
Mhm.
And then it says, such a body of running water which does not flow throughout the year, that is intermittent,
Mhm.
is a stream except for that portion up gradient of bogs, swamps, wet meadows, and marshes. So if you want to make it stricter than the Wetlands Protection Act, you include that portion of the stream that is up gradient of a bog, a swamp, wet meadow, or marsh.
that makes sense.
I guess, yeah, you can do that if that's fitting to what you want.
You can do that. I think it depends on what how you're trying to regulate it. So if it's just gonna be a 25-foot no touch, like you're trying to do for BVWs and everything else, you don't have to define it specifically, because it would be flagged as a BVW bank scenario with the
You could,
same offset.
but I agree that putting it in there brings clarity to the reader.
Fair enough. Yeah, is that the consensus from everybody?
So you're saying even if you don't change it, Elaine, from the WPA, that you want to include it in here, is that, or are you?
I'm saying that, first of all, if you want it stricter than the WPA, you include those streams which are up gradient of a BVW, which the Wetlands Protection Act does not do.
Mhm.
So that would make it stricter than the Wetlands Protection Act. And then you would define it so it's in there, so people understand that it's a stream, that you're regulating it. And then you can also go back and have the same level of protection as you do with a BVW.
Mhm.
I just think that you have to think of your basic layperson reader.
Yeah.
BVWs are kind of a hazy thing, but everybody knows what a stream is, even an intermittent stream. And I think it brings clarity to the person who's reading. I mean, you could do it the other way, but I think this makes it clear.
So
And then include those streams that are up gradient of BVW, so you're gonna lose them.
So if you're doing that, and you would have a performance standard for the bank and add, more protection for the bank, you can do all,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's what you would do if you're adding it.
yeah, you're not gonna change your level of protection that you have for your BVWs. Or you may also have a situation where you have an intermittent stream and really not so much of a BVW. That happens too.
Yeah.
And that way you bring that in just in case you need it.
Would that apply to all streams or only intermittent streams? Adding the up gradient component?
Well, the
It's
thing
inter-
is, if you
Oh.
have, it's unusual to have a stream up gradient of a resource area that isn't intermittent.
Mhm.
I mean, it kind of doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That makes sense,
And
yeah.
then once it flows into the BVW, then it has enough
Mm.
water in the hydraulic
Yeah.
regime to create a stream,
Yeah.
down gradient
Yeah.
stream.
Yeah.
But this protects your little streams up gradient. And I think you want to do that because you need to preserve all the water and all the habitat you can as the town gets more and more developed.
Would that include a new riverfront area on that up gradient part as well?
Not if you have an intermittent stream.
Yeah, I wouldn't, that's where
Okay.
it would get confusing.
Yeah.
So you're essentially gonna regulate it as a BBW. You're just calling it out as an intermittent stream.
Yeah.
And I think what you do is you just have a performance standard around the bank.
Mhm.
For the protection of the bank.
Yeah.
So essentially, if you were to go and do work around intermittent stream, for example, right? You would need to, say you get a crosswalk, for example.
Yeah.
right? You would have to span it.
Yeah.
You could say, well, you can't impact the bank. You can't have any loss of bank, for example. And then, so if that's the case, then you have to span it.
Then you have to
That's-
span it.
That's how you would, practical, that's how you would.
Yeah, which
So if
is
you
what
write
you
that
would
in,
want to do,
right.
which is what you would want to do because you're trying to create wildlife corridors.
Mhm. Okay, I've come around, Elaine, I
Okay.
like that. I do have a question though, like, for example, in that scenario, are utilities exempt from a local bylaw? Because I'm just thinking about the work that was done up at Breakheart in that power line cut. They definitely kind of, I don't know, some of those intermittent streams disappeared. Or they're under that new road, you know?
Yep, yeah, I follow you. I would have to look at we would have to look at what protections that the utilities have. They definitely have a lot that I know. They have exemptions in the WPA and they definitely have other laws. So for example, like I can't require them to pay an impact fee for a roadway if
Mhm,
they're cutting into a road, just to give you an example of like how they have protections.
mhm.
We have a fee if you impact a roadway, a square foot fee that has to be paid to us, right? It's because you're impacting the road, even though you patch it. They're exempt from being able to, from paying those, so they don't have to do that. In general, the case law has said that it's because the utilities need to be able to look at a site across the state and be able to plan their work. And if they have different standards at each different place, then it's impossible for them to do that and to plan work effectively. That's basically the case law.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
But we'd have to take a peek at that. My guess is they would be. And you would, yeah,
And in general, they seem to be in a situation where they'll file with us a notice at the beginning of each
Mhm,
project that, of what they're doing, but we generally haven't had a lot of control
right.
over the activities
Yep.
that they undertake
Yep.
through those.
Mhm.
I have another follow-up question to what Aline said. So it sounds like there is a scenario where an intermittent stream has a bank, but perhaps for a portion of it doesn't have a BVW. And so what I don't remember is, did we decide the bank gets a 25-foot setback?
I think you should.
that's what you, if you're calling out a definition for an intermittent stream and you're changing the WPA definition to roll it in, then yes.
Mhm.
So we need to call out intermittent streams in section 2 for jurisdiction.
Mhm.
We probably do that we may need to do that as a separate bullet, since the first two perennial streams have a 200-foot riverfront area. And bank, freshwater, wetland, etc., has 100-foot, or do we want to keep it in there
So see, I
with the
think,
bank? You're suggesting we keep it there?
I was suggesting honestly, as we're writing this, right, because today we're just gonna define the resource areas and get that
Right.
hammered down, right? You know, when we were looking at this and Ethan and I were talking, the thought was to try to follow of the kind of the way the WPA does it.
Mhm.
And so Andover's version is a good example of that, where they, define the resource area, why it's important, then they have, the performance standards based on that. So you have individual sections based on the resource area. So the layman has a much easier way to do this. Because what ends up happening in these local bylaws is you have to check 7 sections to figure out what you can do and what you can't.
Yeah.
Much easier if we have it all under one section.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you essentially define what you have for resource areas, right, and call them, then you give definitions of what they are.
Yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
and then you have your performance standards that go with.
It's
Right.
essentially like this one, Paul. You have this section, but for each resource.
Right, and that's the organization of the regulations or your,
I would
Some
put it,
regulations.
at this point, I would put it all together as one document. I don't think you wanna have like separate regulations aside from maybe like, your application process. Because this way it has to go to town meeting to be
Yeah.
changed. Because again, if you're doing, if you're enacting rules and regulations yourselves,
Mm.
right? You get a change in commission in what people think, it's a public meeting and undo your bylaw. So it's both ways, you know?
I see the bylaw almost as like a cover sheet for the regulations, kind of, so.
Yeah.
You could always
Yeah.
separate them later down the line, but
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
But you're suggesting that the regulations should be part of the same action as the bylaw, approved
especially
by
with
the commission and then
his experience.
forwarded to the town meeting for approval
Yes,
as a package.
I do, yeah.
Okay.
So if you want
To avoid the prospect of a future commission that's decided to let most anything happen they want.
Yep. That would have to go back to town.
They'd have to go to town meeting to get that to
undo
happen.
meetings.
Okay.
so my
But-
understanding is that legally regulations, if a commission has the authority to promulgate regulations, they have that authority, and it's not something that really can be regulated in a town meeting because the discretion and authority lies with the commission. So it either has to be all in the bylaw or they're in regulations, which the commission has the authority to promulgate. I don't think you can sort of act like the town meeting can regulate regulations, you know?
They definitely can. I mean, you're writing the bylaw, so the bylaw defines what can and can't be done, right? So.
Yeah, But essentially, I think kind of, because I've spoken with Tom Mullen about this, and so I think what you're suggesting is put everything in the bylaw.
Yeah, and I've talked to him too. He says regulations should be in the bylaw. That's a better way to do it.
That also provides some protection for folks who are concerned that a future commission could decide to implement regulations that are far more stringent.
Yep.
And that, at times is a fear you hear expressed. So this way, in either case, town meeting has a firm and permanent say on this because the regulations are part of the bylaw. So the whole package goes up as a single document that's approved, and changes to it have to go in the same way to town meeting.
Yes.
So it
So-
avoids that sort of rogue commission in either direction, either deregulating or overregulating.
Okay, so I had a conversation with Tom Mullen about this. And my takeaway or my understanding was the suggestion that you put the meaty things, you don't put all the regulations into the bylaw. You put the sort of controversial, what the things that people are gonna get hung up on.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to put the fees in here.
That's what I'm saying. So I would recommend that your regulations are essentially your process for approving projects. That's what
Yes.
how I would recommend it.
So when I look at the town of
Choosing-
Andover as an example,
Yeah.
they have a wetland protection bylaw
Mhm.
that looks a lot like our draft bylaw. It's organized pretty much the same way. It's only 7 pages long. And then they have a separate document that is the regulations that has much more detail. Right?
Mhm.
But the original bylaw follows kind of the same layout as most of the other bylaws that I sent in that spreadsheet in terms of what's in it and ordering. I think if we want to, I happen to like the regulations layout of the Andover, and I would go that route. I just want to make sure we have a bylaw that's concise and you know what I mean. I want 2 different documents. The bylaw that's relatively concise and hits the high level points, and then follow the example of Andover. Have you taken a look at that, Paul?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
The question I would ask is, are you suggesting that the bylaw and regulations go forward together to town meeting? Or are you saying that the regulations be left as an implementing matter for the commission?
no, I think we should draft them ahead of, like, I think we should have
No.
here's our
Drafting is
bylaw.
one thing, but
Here's
we
our
going to-
bylaw ahead of the meeting. My hope would be based on feedback. Here's the bylaw, the 7-page summary of what we're gonna do. And here's the regulations that you know, are supporting our bylaw. So as a voter, when you go into town meeting, you can see how the wetlands, the bylaw is going to be regulated through the regulations. But again,
but are the regulations going to go to town meeting for approval, or are you suggesting the
don't.
regulations do not?
They
See, there's
don't.
the problem.
They can't,
Highly
they
recommend
can't.
I would highly recommend not doing it that way. Because you're basically opening yourself up to undo all your regulations with any type of person. So you get a bunch of developers on your commission, then you lost all the protections that you just did.
No, but you can say, you can address the protections in your bylaw, you know, and the high level performance standards, right? Like the really key points.
But
That's
the-
what other towns do. And then the regulations are, you know, just go into more detail.
Yeah, I mean, you can, some folks do it that way. I'm telling you, my experience with the Concord one, we got it approved at town meeting. The regulations were added as a separate document and it was moved as a separate article. And it was written in there that you had to bring regulations back to town meeting for approval. So if I'm doing this with you folks, my suggestion would be make it all one big document. So you have your detail stuff in there too, right? And then have a rule and regulation document that talks about your process. So if you want to change your application fees, you want to change your peer reviews things. You
Stuff
want
that
to do,
isn't
right,
like.
Gonna
the
even
resources
change your
changing.
form.
Yeah.
application related things,
That
like
makes
to have that at the commission level, so you can update all of those whenever you choose to. But you have everything else and all the meat and potatoes that's going to town meeting so that it's a hurdle for somebody to undo this.
So you're suggesting that, okay, because what I understood from my conversation with Tom Mullen is you put the key, you know, controversial points in your bylaw, like this won't change, and then you have your regulations and you have them ready for town council. Based on my understanding, I did not understand him to say, take your regulations and get town meeting to approve your regulations. Then you lose the power to adjust your regulations as necessary.
But see, you're looking at it from one perspective, right? That you want to adjust it to add more protection. That, right? That's what.
Well, no, I mean, I think something like buffers, we're not gonna change in the regulations what we do with the buffers, like that goes in
Yeah.
resource areas, all of that goes in.
But your performance standards change, right? So you could change that at any point. So somebody could undo all of that. You have a 25-foot buffer, right? And then they undo with the performance standards to make them so lenient that they have no teeth.
But the buffer is on the resource, but if you're changing the resource itself.
You get it. So
But you
that-
can't, because we've defined it in the bylaw, like you
Doesn't work
define
that
it
way.
and you say no alteration,
the
but
performance
I mean, why
standards-
don't we draft the language and then decide, you know, further along in the process, which parts are gonna be in the bylaw, which parts are gonna stay in the regulations.
That's a fair
Yeah.
proposal.
Yeah, and just a heads up, it's 12:50. I'm gonna jump off at 1, whether
Yeah,
the
no, we
meeting's
have,
going
I
or not.
have
So,
okay.
We can discuss other concepts, but we can't come to any further conclusions without you, I'm afraid.
well, you can't deliberate, and because I'm interested, I'm gonna
Yeah, no, we have to
not to
end.
deliberate when I'm not here.
I think you'll have a much higher difficulty getting this approved if you're not having your regulations approved at town meeting. Just in my experience, that's what happened and I think, Eleanor, I've mentioned this a couple of times. That's what happened in Concord. They didn't do it that way. They gave you drafts and town meeting said, absolutely not. You're gonna come with these for changes, and had that in the bylaw as a requirement that the rules and regulations get town meeting approved. So you can still have them as two documents, like we're saying, but I would
We
definitely.
can talk to, attorney, you know, the bylaw attorney about that. I would not be comfortable
That would
making
be
a
Tom
determination now.
Mullen. Well, that would be Tom Mullen, and when I talked to him, he said he would agree with that.
I think all three of us had conversations and had slightly different understandings. So,
Well, I think we need to move along and at
Yes.
least try to address some of the other matters we've got in front of us today.
I had a question about the land underwater bodies, if that's something that we would want to include, or if that would just be redundant. As adding that as a resource.
I probably.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
It's
So-
already protected under the WPA.
Mhm.
So,
Unless we're changing
that-
anything about that.
I mean, we are,
Does that-
go ahead, Jennifer, sorry.
Does that extend to intermittent streams, the
Mm.
BPA?
If you choose to. If you
We'd
wanted
have to extend it.
So you would say that you're gonna consider that to be land underwater, so. The way it works at the state level is if you're working in land underwater, right, you would have to go through another process at the state level. So you have to get a watersway permit as well, and so there's a whole separate set of protections and performance standards that you need to meet under that process.
It's probably already protected enough for us through.
With the bank
As
and
well as
the
the
buffer,
WPA.
yeah.
And I think it'd be confusing, now your regulations would be ginormous, because you'd have to
Yeah.
do land underwater and all the stuff that's in the chapter 91 permit.
I mean, essentially what we've said, or what we proposed to say in this bylaw is that to the extent that we're silent on something that's covered by the WPA, the WPA governs.
Right,
And
and the
that's-
new, yeah. And the new areas of intermittent stream, that we would be regulating would be protected by a 25-foot setback around the bank and any bordering vegetated wetlands, so. And an
Yeah.
intermittent stream is not that wide, so,
Right.
Correct.
okay.
So we would add in the term intermittent stream in the discussion of jurisdiction.
Use the definition to incorporate the up gradient stream from a BVW.
Hmm.
And that would be that's how it's regulated different, and then you'd have a performance standard on the bank of the intermittent stream. As well, that's how you would do it.
So I have a
Okay.
question about that 25-foot setback.
Yeah.
So a 25-foot setback can be lawn.
Mhm.
A 25-foot setback can be just leave it alone.
Yeah.
But often what you want next to a stream is you would prefer to get rid of that lawn. You would prefer to get rid of perhaps all of the invasive species that are along that intermittent stream.
Yep.
Do you want to put anything in the bylaw as part of your performance standard that 25-foot setback may also include the obligation to plant with native species? That way you turn your waterways into kind of a feeding station along the way.
Yeah, so that's next week's.
That's
or
next week's
That's
conversation.
next week's
Okay.
meeting, so we get
Good
through
Okay,
the resource areas, and then we
All right.
start. My guess is probably we're gonna go through a couple of them at a time, realistically.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
And then. Okay,
And then are we regulating land subject to flooding as jurisdictional under the bylaw? And then is bordering and isolated gonna have any changes?
just the isolated, right? Oh,
We include
isolated land
isolated-
subject. Oh,
We include isolated vegetated wetland as a wetland that's not protected under the state law.
Yep.
Such wetland shall be protected under this bylaw if it is naturally occurring and meets all the other criteria of 310 CMR 10.55, with the exception of connection to water bodies and size. So the answer is
And
yeah.
then
Yeah,
Land, isolated land subject to flooding, was that under isolated wetlands or is that a separate item?
I think that the decisions about isolated wetlands are gonna hinge on how whether we use a presumption of a vernal pool habitat, because that would essentially capture pretty much every isolated wetland unless the applicant proves that that is not a vernal pool. And
That's a good point.
so, and what I've heard from Matt Byrne is that, who's an expert on vernal pools, is that most isolated land subject to flooding, or what gets categorized as that actually usually is a vernal pool, which is, would be a reason to have that presumption of a vernal pool habitat. But I think all of the isolated wetlands are gonna hinge on whether we're doing the presumption of a vernal pool. Or
Yep.
do you assess in or do you assess out with a vernal pool?
So that's an important definition. That's gonna probably be one of the biggest ones in this.
Vernal pool?
A vernal pool / isolated wetland, and how you want to define it and how you want to protect it. If it's gonna be, if the presumption is that an isolated wetland is a vernal pool, that's a lot more stringent than most of the bylaws, but if that's what the commission's looking to do, I would say that understanding how you define it and how it is gonna be, actually put on the ground and surveyed is pretty critical. One of the bylaws I read, it's like you have to only look at the isolated wetland at a certain time of the year. So if you're, and it's ridiculous in my mind. I mean, you can't.
You can't do it. You
I
can't
don't think you
enforce
can,
it.
I don't think you can do.
Well, a lot of places do that. I mean, I know that that's really challenging, but a lot of bylaws do that. And I
Yep.
did email Matt Byrne and say, really, how can you assess a vernal pool habitat when it's dry or essentially not in the spring? And he basically said you can't.
So you would essentially, but you could write it this way, where you're saying, okay, it's assumed that it is a vernal pool. Unless you can provide evidence that it's not, including this during the season. So basically, if I'm going to do a project, I know that, okay, I have this isolated wetland. I have 100-foot buffer that I can't touch it now, right? And because that's all the habitat, so that's all a resource area now, right? And I can only refute that resource area and knock it down to 25 if I do a study in the spring to determine that there's nothing in here.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, any assessment that it's there or any assessment that it's not there essentially has to be done in the spring.
Well, no, I'm saying that you said presumption, right? So
Unless you use a presumption, and even in that case, to overcome the presumption, that has to be done in spring.
yeah, that's exactly what I was
That's what
saying.
Bill was
It's sort of
saying.
the
Yeah.
path we had discussed before. It's
Yeah.
just getting details down when
Yeah.
it comes up.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I will have to jump off. I apologize.
Yeah. I
Okay.
guess we,
Go ahead.
no, I guess we have to adjourn. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank
This
you.
was actually really, 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 really helpful.
Yeah,
So when do we meet again? Before
let's do
we-
that before we scoot, right?
Yeah,
So
we-
we're looking, I was thinking we would do bi-weekly so that we can have time in between to write stuff up and provide it. So we have language to discuss. So,
Paul, I think we can also use our meeting time in between to,
we can, yeah.
yeah, just
And
our,
I think we should do that and move through as much as we can in terms of getting language down.
yeah, so if you're doing it that way and we're kind of basing it on the schedule to get this, you're trying to hit for Springtown meeting, and you focus just on those chunks of language.
Mhm,
Our next,
I think that would move the project, this whole thing along.
mhm.
we have a meeting this Tuesday, so we should do it then.
Yes, I asked for it to be on the
You
agenda.
asked for. Ethan did
So,
include
but
that.
yeah, but
so,
a meeting on Tuesday, Ethan's not gonna be able to draft it up for Tuesday. Right? I mean,
No, we're just gonna talk through.
Throughout the meeting.
Sure.
We'll work through what we can as a group and address, try to come to
Yeah.
concurrence within the three of us on issues and.
And we could start to draft. the
Yeah.
Language
Yes.
after.
Exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
that makes sense.
And then, so our next meeting would be 2 weeks from today, is what you're suggesting, Bill?
Yeah, so Halloween, if everybody's down with that.
I'm all right with
Fine.
that.
You're gonna
Just
let-
have to be home
Understood.
later in the day to distribute candy to the the handful of kids that show up.
And I'm expecting everybody in costumes.
Sure.
I can pull a mask down off the wall. I have a few.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I should be able to be here. I may have an issue, but I'll let you folks know. But let's
Yep.
plan it for now, and you can still meet, I guess, without me if you wanted to. It's up to you. But
Where? Here again?
well, I mean, the reason we got this room is because we were planning to all be here, and we're not all here. So is this the way it's going to be? Because if it's going to be remote, essentially, then I wouldn't suggest getting this room anymore.
Yeah, it might
That
be
makes
just as
sense,
easy
yeah.
to just
Uh,
do it as a remote meeting.
Just a regular Zoom meeting?
Yeah.
So I'll
Yeah.
just come to your office, Ethan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or-
Sorry, honestly, my work is getting a little hectic, so it's hard to tack on the driving time.
No worries. I thought you were the one that asked for it. So, but-
I asked for this meeting. I thought I could certainly come to this one, but I had something put on my calendar and that's
Yeah.
just the way things are right now.
the way life is.
So let's
Life
let's
is life.
plan for it as a virtual meeting, like
Okay.
as we do virtually everything else.
Yep.
And schedule it for Friday the 31st at noon again.
Okay.
I should, you know what? If it's virtual, then I should be able to get on, regardless
Okay.
of where I am.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Sounds good, everybody.
Oh,
Thank
you gotta
you all.
adjourn us.
I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second. Jennifer second. Eleanor moved to adjourn. Jennifer second. All in favor? Eleanor,
Yes.
Jennifer. And I vote. So we are adjourned. We'll see you all Tuesday evening.